Good evening, everyone, and welcome to It Says What, where JW3 and Limmud come together to bring you unexpected and poignant Jewish content from across the community every single week. I am Joe Hyman, the young JW3 programmer, and this evening we've got a brilliant speaker coming tonight. If you can hear some fireworks at the moment, don't mind me. It's just Guy Fawkes night here, and there's lots of things going on outside my window. If you've not met us before, JW3 is a one-of-a-kind Jewish community centre in London that's open to all. We partner to bring you this programme with Limmud, a diverse and inclusive worldwide community of Jewish learning. Just a reminder that although our physical building will be closed from today, we're still offering all of our events online and all of our archival content on JW3 TV. This series will ask educators, artists, and leaders from across the Jewish community in the UK and abroad to share a surprising piece of Jewish wisdom for our time. You can ask your own questions on Facebook or YouTube. Please comment on the live feed and we'll take some towards the end. I am delighted to welcome Joshua Mikutis, the Jewish learning designer at JW3. He was ordained from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in May 2018 and graduated with a Master in Jewish Nonprofit Management from the Zellico School of Jewish Nonprofit Management. Originally from Dayton, Ohio, he graduated from Haverford College with honors in religion and history and with a minor in Russian from Bryn Mawr College. After college, he worked as an Avodah Corp member at New York Legal Assistance Group in their Immigrant Protection Unit. In 2012, he first connected with JW3, the organization he currently works for, when he traveled on an insider trip to Moscow. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Anna. Welcome, Joshua.
Thanks so much, Joe. It's really great to be here with you today/tonight.
I'm really glad to have you, and it's a big day where you are, and I'm glad that we could provide some sort of respite from checking the news.
It's always good to be able to dive into Jewish text and just to know that that this is a source of wisdom and comfort for the Jewish people for thousands of years.
100%, and I'm glad that we can do that. So let's hear it. What is the text that made you say, "It says what"?
So I'm excited to share this text with you, which is in Chulin, a Masechet of the Babylonian Talmud. And I just wanted to share first on sort of an autobiographical level that I learned this text from Jeremy Lee, who is a great teacher of Jewish history and travel. And I believe that he learned it from Rabbi Michael Marmer, who's another phenomenal teacher. And so on a personal level, I just love that this text, for me, has the quality of transmission that is mirrored in the Talmud. That Rabbi Marmer learned it from somewhere, shared it with Jeremy, who taught it to me, and now I have the great fortune to be sharing it with all of you. I think that one of the special things about learning Jewish text with others is that our encounter is not just with the text itself, but that through the encounter with the other person, that text from then on bears their imprint. So whatever I teach today carries the lessons, the words, the ideas, the memories imparted to me by those two teachers and those who taught them. So for me, what made me read this text and stop and say, "It says what," is that it threads an elegant line between two ideas that are frequently placed in opposition. So that of universalism and that of particularism. Or to put it more specifically for our purposes, how do we balance our obligations towards the Jewish people and to the whole world? Does it need to be a zero-sum game? Or is it possible that the two can not only exist in relation to each other, but can actively affirm and inform each other? Now, it's true that you can find lots of different points, lots of liturgical moments, lots of holidays in Judaism that I think act to harmonize these two, let's call them competing obligations. But rarely do we see a story that wraps it together so nicely and powerfully. So in our story, we're going to meet a person by the name of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair and witness his encounter with three strangers, two who happen to be other humans, and one happens to be a river. So for me, the "it says what" alert also pops up when we encounter a talking river, because how often do you get to see that? But what I'm really most interested in is a little bit of what I spoke about earlier, which is how the story harmonizes two obligations. The first is our obligation to support Jews, whether it's rescuing them from danger or elevating their ability to live deeply Jewish lives. And second is our obligation to support the non-Jews in our world. And that when we are able to do both of these things, the Talmud is going to make an amazing claim that we might get compared to Moses himself. So here we are in Masechet Hulin, which largely deals with shechita, or laws of ritual slaughter, and laws about kashrut. But what we're going to see really has nothing to do with that. Before we dive into our story here, the Talmud opens with a question about whether mishaps can happen through the animals of the righteous. And that's a whole complex idea that we're not going to dive into or even get an idea of in this specific story itself. It's going to come afterwards. But from there, I think that there's something interesting about the framing idea, which is we learn that God never causes mishaps to happen through the animals of the righteous. And so without diving too deep into the nuances of this idea, I want to look at the larger conceptual question, which is what causes things to happen in the world? Are we at the mercy of external forces? Is God the mastermind behind everything? Do we depend on other humans? And what we're going to get in our story is really one of partnership, of mutual obligation, what we call in Hebrew arevut, or mutual responsibility, and the sense that our fates are really intertwined with others. So the story starts here, that it's based on an incident where Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was going to engage in the redemption of captives, and he encountered the Genai River. So our story, like so many in the Talmud, begins with no real introduction to our character or build-up, but we just go right into Pinchas ben Yair, that he's about to engage into what we call pidyon shvuim, or the redemption of captives, meaning that somewhere a Jew is being held captive and ransomed. Because of the tragedies and vicissitudes of Jewish history, the redemption of captives becomes a core tenet, and it takes on incredible importance. And I think at the heart of this tragic fact is an acknowledgement that ultimately, that if we do not look out for this individual Jew or group of Jews who have been taken captive, no one will. That the obligation falls clearly on our plates, and we look away at our own peril. For me, this reflects what I spoke earlier about the ideas of particularism, or our specific obligations to Jews. This is it in its barest sense. A human life is at stake, and at this moment of desperation, we must move in order to make something happen. So this story is kind of a classic adventure story. Our hero, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, sets out to save someone. And what's an adventure story without an adversary? But our adversary is a peculiar one, which is a river. So now we come to the real core narrative element of the story. So Pinchas ben Yair confronts this river. He said to the river, "Genai, part your water for me, and I will pass through you." The river said to him, "You are going to perform the will of your maker, and I am going to perform the will of my maker, to flow in my path. With regard to you, it is uncertain whether you will perform his will successfully, and it is uncertain whether you will not perform his will successfully. I will certainly perform his will successfully." Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair said to the river, "If you do not part, I will decree upon you that water will never flow through you." The river parted for him. I think here we find a really great moment of Jewish comedy, that we have a standoff between the rabbi versus the river. And the gist of their conflict is that they each have their own work to do. They both need to perform the will of their maker. The river should be a river, which means that it shouldn't arbitrarily stop flowing. That would just defy what we presume to be the natural order of the way that rivers work. And the rabbi is on his own sacred adventure quest to free a captive. But in what feels like it could be an interminable standoff between two competing forces who both have their own work to do, Pinchas ben Yair raises the stakes dramatically. He essentially tells the river that if it doesn't abide by his wishes, he will make it so the river stops being a river. So it's unclear where he gets the power to make this proclamation, or maybe he's just bluffing. But nonetheless, out of this little duel, the river stands down. And I think tucked in here, we get such an apt metaphor for the challenges that confront us in life. Challenges will remain in front of us regardless of what we aim to do. And it's upon us to look at these challenges and say, I am going to be the one who passes. Or actually, I think really a better way of putting it is going to be, we're going to be the one who pass. And we'll come more on this later on in the story. But let's not totally lose track of the moment in the face of the metaphor. Our rabbi just performs a heroic, miraculous act. And who else do we know who has split bodies of water before? Moses. So don't worry, the Talmud has its finger on this pulse, and we will return back to this piece. From the way the story has gone so far, that Pinchas ben Yair, on his glorious adventure quest to save a life, has just made a miracle happen. I think it could be a satisfactory story on its own. In the face of obstacles, he meets it, and then he triumphs. But that would make this too much like a standard adventure story, one that obsesses about the individual and does not interrogate their place in the world. And what makes this story extraordinary is that it's not just the story of an individual, but the story of community, the story of collectivity. The story continues. There was a certain man who was carrying wheat for the preparation of matzah for Passover. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair said to the river, part your waters for that person too, as he is engaged in the performance of a mitzvah. The river parted for him. At this point in the story, we have two significant things occurring. First, the mitzvah that the rabbi helps out is for the preparation of matzah for Passover. It's that of supporting ritual life. It's still a particularistic move. It's oriented towards helping the Jewish people, just like his own action of redeeming a captive. However, it's not driven by strictly humanitarian motives. Whereas the Jewish captive's life really does depend on the actions of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, here we're moving in a different direction. This certain man will help others in the observance of Passover and will be able to engage in a mitzvah. A life is not fundamentally at stake here, at least not in its most limited sense. Here we see, though, an acknowledgement that in order for Jewish life to be as richly lived as possible, it must have content to supplement that meaning. It must be a lived and embodied Judaism. And I think Pinchas ben Yair intuitively understands that it needs to be endowed with culture and spirituality. So his act of redeeming the captive is different from the certain man's preparation of matzah, but the two of them become placed on similar playing fields because we see that the river again admits defeat. It parts. And I think that the second significant thing is that he essentially asks the question, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair does, who is on this journey with me? He could so easily become wrapped up in his own heroism, but instead his mind has become expanded to consider those around him. And we see that continuing in the next part of the story. There was a certain Arab, Ta'ayah, who was accompanying them. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair said to the river, part your waters for that person too, so that he will not say, is that what one does to a person who accompanies him? The river parted for him. So far, we had been operating in the realm of the particular, whether it was caring directly about the life of a Jew or the things that constitute meaning in the life of a Jew. But here we expand into the realm of the universal. The language is very specific. The Ta'ayah, or Arab or merchant, however it's differently translated, is accompanying them. They are on this journey together. Though they come from different backgrounds and they all have different tasks, they are all facing the same river. He understands that the Jewish people are not an island, that so many others accompany us, and that we have an obligation to look out for their welfare. I think that what happens here is that Pinchas Ben Yair's frame of reference continues to expand. He starts with his own mission, then becomes aware of others in the community and their mission, and then expands beyond to those outside of his community. And I think he's influenced by his own particularistic actions. He sees how we can support Jews in our community, whether it's through saving their lives or enriching the Jewishness of their lives. And that inspiration spurs him on to the universal. And now, as we mentioned earlier, the Talmud is going to come back to Moses. Rav Yosef said, "How great is this man, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, greater than Moses and the 600,000 who left Egypt, as there at the Red Sea the waters parted one time, and here the waters parted 3 times." The Gemara asks, and perhaps here too, the waters parted one time, and the river began to flow only after all 3 of them passed. Rather, this man was as great as Moses and the 600,000 children of Israel. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, a rabbi who is, I would say, unfortunately not as familiar to most Jews as many of the other rabbis who fill up the pages of the Talmud, is declared here to be potentially greater than Moses and the 600,000 who left Egypt, or at least as great. Either way you cut it, it's an amazing and audacious claim. And I think that what's happening as Rav Yosef is reflecting on this story is that he's making his own thesis statement of sorts and saying that what Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair does is to really encapsulate or maybe emulate the greatness of Judaism. In these 3 river crossings, we find a powerful moral picture. One of concern for the physical fate of the Jewish people, one of concern for their cultural and spiritual fate, and one of deep concern for all those who we share this earth with. And I think at the end of this, the question then turns back to us. How will we emulate Pinchas ben Yair? What will we do to turn to the rivers in our own words and demand that they part?
Wow. Thank you for sharing this text. I think it's what stood out for me, in addition to the sense of responsibility for people outside of our own community, was that this text does not accept just a kind of a survivalist Judaism, one that is just about making sure that people stay Jewish. It makes about making sure people are engaged in some way with the culture. And it's a positive engagement as opposed to, say, a negative engagement. That's really beautiful. What I want to ask you though is, what made this text surprising for you, and how did you receive this text when you first saw it? Did you come from a place that valued a very particularistic view of Judaism, in that we look after Jews and Jews only, or did you come from a space that was more universalistic, that said that Jews should be responsible for the whole world as well as them? Where are you coming from for this text?
It's a great question, and I hope that this isn't too much of cheating to say this, but I really, really try to keep a foot in both worlds, and to see how I can, hold both things at once. And I think that what made this text so exciting and surprising for me is that I really saw that aspiration reflected in the text. I think there's always a challenge when we're studying Jewish texts in that we want to see ourselves reflected in them. We want to see the text speak back to us and say what we believe. And I think there's kind of a challenge in that, which is, how do you respect the autonomy of the text and the fact that it's reflective of a world and a context that is so different from yours. But when you have those moments where it just feels like the text is just speaking so clearly to something that really resonates deeply with you, it can be really surprising and encouraging in a powerful way.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that alignment, and this text clearly does that. For someone who cares about global Jewish responsibility, and I think it's really, really important. the imagery in this text is so interesting, and I love that kind of fight between Rabbi Pinchas and the river. And the river says something interesting that I saw when you were sharing it. That the river says, "There's nothing going to stop me fulfilling God's wishes, God's path for me. But you, I'm not sure about." What do you get from that as an educator, someone who's seen this text? Because it feels like there's something about certainty there, that the river's like, no, I'm a sure thing, and you're not, so I'm not going to move my ways. And then the river does. So it's definitely interesting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really just powerful and strange moment. And I think that from an educational perspective, it's that, you know, how do how do I help shift the people who I'm working with to to be able to see themselves as capable of diving into these conversations and seeing them as being written in these texts and taking part of them. And so I think it's very easy often to imagine the external world, or not even imagine that it feels like the no that we can get from the external world is so strong, and that it can feel so easy for that to manifest then into our own self-doubt. And that ultimately, like at the end of the day, it boils down to Pinchas ben Yair. The river is going to do what the river is going to do. Something is only going to happen if Pinchas ben Yair figures out a way to move the dial or become an active agent at this moment.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting to see that river as this partner in dialogue when it comes to conversations about Jewish responsibility for those outside of our community. Like when that partner is standing strong to kind of just being as they are, not changing, and not responding to a potential risk of their safety to save someone else. That dialogue is so important, it seems. Another element of the text which is really interesting to me is that it's miraculous. And it doesn't seem necessary to me for it to be miraculous. I really love how it connects it with the story of Moses and builds Pinchas ben Yair into this leader of Jewish people in his mindset. But what would you say in terms of why this is miraculous? I mean, couldn't they have just built a bridge? Is there an element of speed in this story that reflects the kind of the speed at which one needs to respond to this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if going back to your previous question, if the function of there being a miracle is that there ultimately needs to be conviction and belief in the rightness of Pinchas ben Yair's obligation, not only for the captive he is going to redeem, but for these other two people who are with him. That it's almost like if the story had sort of a simple logistical answer, then it just wouldn't be so compelling. So what? He, puts together a bunch of logs and is able to to cross the river. But because the river is crossed through a function of his own kind of certainty in, no, this is what I'm doing, this is what I believe in, and this is what I believe in for these two people who are accompanying me, it just allows the story to land with a different kind of punch and a different sort of message, which is kind of ironic, I think, because we normally think about miracles as being somewhat external to us, are things that we are the recipients of, or that they just happen. Whereas here, it's really, and I guess this is where the Moses comparison comes in, is that it's also a product of the will of the individual at this moment.
Yeah, no, completely. I think that piece about Moses reminds me of the fact that in that moment, and this was a completely different moment in Jewish history, but that moment, the people who were saved were the Jewish people, and then the Egyptians were consumed by the river as opposed to saved, which I guess it's a really complex and difficult thing to think about. Kind of killing a large swathe of people, but also protecting Jewish continuity, I guess. But I wonder if you had any thoughts on that comparison. And also just to throw in another question in addition to that, which is kind of more general, is how does a text like this inform your work when lots of people, at least in my experience, have been brought up in a way that prioritizes the particularist when it comes to Judaism? Do other people who you share this text with find it surprising, or is it something that is kind of, oh yeah, that makes sense?
Yeah. So in terms of the first question, there is something, I mean, really powerful about this comparison between Moses and Pinchas ben Yair, also in the sort of scale of the whole thing. That, you know, in the Exodus, it's this dramatic existential moment where, right, you've got this army crushing behind you, and it leads to the moment that, you know, the Jews start to become a more cohesive people. And it's amazing that then we get this comparison to kind of what seems to be a sort of not mundane, but at least less extraordinary moment in history. At least one with, you know, with unfortunately minimal historical memory of, or, you know, this isn't really a text that is so widely taught or shared. So I think that there's something about, you know, recognizing the power that we possess in our own lives and trying to see the miraculous in our own worlds, which, you know, can feel a little dissimilar from what we read in Torah. In regards to your second question, I think that, you know, I think that what works with this text is that it speaks to you whichever place you have your foot in the camp, whether it is hardcore universalism or hardcore particularism. And I think it pushes both people in a direction which is really, really powerful. And in regards to my work, I mean, I think it's just really important to, when we're working with young Jews from around the world, to really expand their understanding of who we can be in relationship with. So, you know, whether that is the Jewish community in Bucharest, or at Agahoz Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda. I think I may have mixed up some of the words. Apologies to all the ASYV alums out there. So that ultimately, like, the story that we see here is one of encountering others. That it's Pinchas ben Yair with this matzah carrying man and this fellow traveler, and the way that his engagement with them, I think, changes him to some extent, and that I think that educationally, that is what I'm conscious of as well with the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really love how the text has that kind of, those avenues for both kinds of people to come in. It's like, if you care a lot about particularism, here's the piece about the non-Jewish person, the merchant. But if you don't care at all about ritual, or you don't care at all about your own people, it comes in and says, actually, no, that's also vital. I really think this story is so valuable in these conversations, especially in a time when our responsibility for people around the world is so important. You know, whether it be in voting, or whether it be in standing up for people who don't have voices right now, whether it be kind of in the Uyghur population in China right now. But yeah, this is really, really powerful. Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing this text. I think for anyone hearing it, it's definitely surprising, it's definitely unexpected, and definitely asks us questions about how we relate to our Judaism in a new way. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I love the work that you all do at JW3, and it's been a pleasure to be with you here today.
Thank you. And for everyone watching, as I mentioned before, JW3 is currently closed physically, but open virtually. Check out our online events and also check out JW3 TV for our wonderful archival content. Have a wonderful evening, and Shabbat Shalom for tomorrow.